want to start this afternoon by talking to you guys about the ACT and the SAT, some of the similarities and differences between the two, and then also talk to you about how the SAT is changing and the PSAT is changing. They are making some big shifts for this coming year. The PSAT is going to be completely different for the fall of 2015, and the SAT is going to be completely different in March of 2016. So I want to chat with you about some of those big changes. And if you have questions about anything, just raise your hand. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. And I can stick around for a little bit after if you have individual questions about things. Yes, just a little bit of background about myself. I've been doing this about 11 years, and my company's worked with thousands of students here in the Columbus, Ohio area. Very pleased to partner with Ohio Chinese School this spring to offer some classes. There's a little handout about that for you if you're interested in finding out more about those. And I recently wrote the new Barron's ACT book. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, if you want to take a look at that. And it's not official yet, but I am going to be writing the new Barron's PSAT book because they're making a brand new book for the fall. And students who will be in the classes that we'll be doing, we will be using some of the materials that I'll be able to put in that book before it's published. So, with ACT versus SAT, let's talk through some of these things, just elaborate on them. If you have individual questions or questions about anything, just raise your hand and we'll chat about them. So, both these tests, how are they scored? Well, they're both scored along a curve. Okay, so bell curve with both of them. The ACT is scored from 1 to 36. 1 is not so good, 36 is perfect. And, hi, how are you? The average score is 21 on the ACT. And on the ACT, there's no penalty for guessing. And the SAT, as it currently stands, there is a small guessing penalty. I like to tell students a way to keep that straight is that you act on the ACT. That's what it spells. And then on the SAT, you sit there. That's an easy way to keep that straight. For different schools, depending on where students are thinking about going, there are different levels of how they want to perform. Some of that is laid out there for you. If you want to find out more about what colleges are looking for as far as ACT scores or SAT scores, you can simply Google it. There's also a website called cappex.com. It's just cappex.com where you can go. And they have information about average test scores as well as average GPA that different schools require. So that's a really helpful resource. The SAT, as it stands right now, is scored between 600 and 2400, and you can get as low as a 200 on a section up to 800 on a section. They are shifting that for the new SAT. It's just going to go back to having a maximum of 1600 as it did before. And right now, the SAT just has the reading, math, and writing. That is going to shift in the future. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So those are some of the main things with how the tests are scored. Before I move on to the next thing, does anyone have any questions about scoring? Just the general scoring, overall ideas with that, about either test? Okay. If you're wondering about the PSAT, because those results came back most likely this month or the preceding month, the PSAT is scored just by taking what would be the SAT score and dividing it by 10. So it's 1/10 what the SAT score would be. So you can get a maximum of 240 on the PSAT. Usually for national merit recognition in Ohio, students have had to score around a 212 or around a 214 in order to get national merit recognition. It varies from state to state. Wyoming's the easiest state and Massachusetts the most difficult state. So Ohio's right in the middle with that. So what do the tests cover? Both tests are much more critical thinking skill tests as opposed to the sorts of tests you have for school where you just have to remember particular facts. So the way that I teach students when we're preparing for like the SAT or ACT is very different from how they might learn if they're preparing for, let's say, a history test, foreign language test, some other test for school, because instead of having to cram in a lot of information, just memorize a lot of facts and everything, it's much more about the way that students think how they're able to pace themselves, being aware of how they think through problems, learning different approaches to thinking through the things. Those are all going to be much more helpful approaches to have. So both tests heavily emphasize grammar, the introductory math that students have in high school, algebra and geometry. They also look at reading, essay writing, and critical thinking. Now, the ACT was originally developed a bit more as a content test, and so it expects you to know a little bit more. You are supposed to know for the ACT a bit more grammar, more specifics with math, memorizing formulas. They don't provide you with the math formulas on the ACT. On the SAT, they do provide you with some of the formulas you'll need. The SAT, as it's currently constructed, does have a lot of vocabulary on it. And this is one of the major ways that with the new PSAT and the new SAT, that's all going to shift. Right now, on the current SAT, they have questions, sentence completion questions, where you answer a question and try to figure out the best word given the context. And on the new SAT and PSAT, they are getting rid of the sentence completion questions and having you make determinations based on the context in reading passages. So having to memorize lots and lots of vocabulary is going to become a lot less important than it once was with the new SAT and PSAT. So what will be more important is being able to pick up on context clues and determine what words are appropriate given what you see in a reading passage. What questions do you have about what the tests cover? And please don't be shy about any questions here. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Yes, please.
So the PSAT, the questions are similar to SAT?
They sure are. Yeah, if you look at the PSAT and compare it to the SAT, it's really hard to distinguish between the two. I was reviewing the PSAT with some students because when you get the PSAT, your scores back, the guidance counselor should be able to give you a copy of the test that you used. I know I've had students from Columbus Academy who've gotten their scores back and gotten the booklets. Some of my students in Dublin haven't gotten that back, but just from reviewing that with students, it's pretty much indistinguishable as far as the SAT questions to the PSAT questions. The PSAT is essentially a half-size version of the SAT. It has, as it's currently made, it has 2 reading sections, 2 math, 1 grammar, and so it has 5 sections altogether, whereas the regular SAT has 10 sections. So its major difference between that and the SAT is just the length of it, and also the fact that the PSAT does not have an essay. And that'll be true with the new PSAT as well. Okay. Other questions on the content there? So really, if you're preparing for the SAT, you're definitely preparing for the PSAT as well. And for students who are looking to do well on the PSAT, one of the best things they can do is to maybe take the SAT. The SAT is offered in October before the actual PSAT is given, which is offered in mid-October. And so when I've had students in the past able to get national merit recognition, something they've done is they've gone and taken the PSAT, taken the SAT, and then scored well on that, and then used that to help master the timing, the formatting, and everything to help prepare them for the regular SAT or the PSAT. Yes.
So this year is kind of unique because PSAT will be in October.
Yes.
With a new format.
Yep.
Where kids can still take SAT in old format.
That's correct.
Time.
That's correct.
So if a student has never been exposed to either of the two, what would you recommend?
To either like the ACT or SAT?
Yes, they have never, as the old format has not done nothing, but so to prepare in October, what would you recommend?
With preparing for October, there will be, with
the formats will be different.
The format will be different. There will be materials that are going to come out in March where they will preview what it will be like. They won't have as many materials out, not even close to as many materials as are currently available for the SAT, but there will be some material. There are some practice questions available now, just a handful of them. They're going to be more available in March, even more available in June. I know like Barron's and other publishers are trying to get a lot of materials together quickly for that. They told me it's going to just give me like a couple months to get the book together before, so it'll be a pretty busy winter and spring here for me with that. I think, can you tell me more about how old is your child?
Sophomore right now.
Sophomore, okay. So if they're currently a sophomore and they're going to be a junior,
So they for sure are taking the
they're for
test.
sure taking it, yeah.
Should they prepare in the old way or the new way?
Yeah,
Because that's the foundation.
any preparation that you would do with the old way will continue to help you with the new way, because they're going to still have grammar, they're still going to have math, they're still going to have reading comprehension and vocabulary questions. So it certainly won't hurt to do preparation in the old way. But I think as new material becomes available, it'll be really helpful to try to do that. And also I think one of the major ways the SAT is changing is it's going to be a lot more like the ACT. Both the ACT and SAT are aligning up with the Common Core standards, the National Common Core standards. And so if you look carefully at the way that the College Board has put out that they're going to change the SAT around, it really lines up quite nicely with a lot of the changes you see on the ACT. So I think to be fully prepared for the PSAT in the fall, I would try some ACT stuff. I would maybe do a little bit of the old SAT stuff, and then as new material becomes available for the PSAT, then do all of that you can. Okay. Other questions on test content before we're going on? Okay, so who tends to be good at either test? So, well, the only way to know for sure is to take them both. So I think if you want to have your child try both the ACT and SAT, I think that can make a lot of sense. If you would rather not do that, something you can do is to look at, depending on how old your child is, you can look back at the plan results. Those align with the ACT. Also, the Aspire is a new test that aligns with the ACT, so you can look at Aspire and plan results to see if those line up with that. And with the SAT, you can look at the PSAT to see if that lines up. You can compare percentiles. That's a good way to compare one test to another. So if there's a major difference, if someone's scoring, say, 95th percentile on the Aspire and then only 65th percentile or 70th percentile on the PSAT, I think it would make more sense to focus just on the ACT. But if they're pretty close, 5, 10, 15% points away as far as percentiles, then it can make a lot of sense to do, try both. And then after seeing both, going from there and focusing a bit more on one for further preparation there. But students who tend to be good at one test tend to be good at the other. And I think that's going to be even more true now that the SAT is shifting. If someone is faster, if you're able to finish the ACT, for most students, that is often a better fit. When I have students, I'm tutoring them and they're able to get through the ACT without any difficulty, that tends to be a much better fit for them. If someone wants a little bit more time to go through things, then the SAT can often be a better fit. So if if your child has extended time because he or she has an IEP or a 504 plan for, let's say, ADD or dyslexia or some other situation like that, maybe they've had multiple concussions, they can do the test with extended time if that's approved. And one thing, if you have any fears about doing extended time because you don't want that to impact the admissions decisions, colleges are prohibited from knowing that a student took the test with extended time. So if your child does have something like dyslexia or ADHD, please, please, please talk to your school and look into getting extended time for that. They can get sometimes 50% extended time, 100%, maybe even 200% extended time, depending on their particular situation. So for students who do have the extended time, the ACT tends to be a better fit. Now, with the SAT, the reason I say with students, if someone has more test anxiety, the SAT is often a better fit for two reasons. Number one, because the questions gradually get more difficult as they go with the SAT and PSAT. it's less likely that if someone is a bit anxious when they're taking the test that they're going to get stuck on a question. So the ACT has a bit more of a random order of difficulty, except on the math and science. There's some system to that, but less likely they're going to get stuck on things. And also, a big source of anxiety for a lot of students is finishing the test within the time. And on the SAT, it's a lot easier to finish within the time allotted. And that's going to continue to be the case with the revised versions there. Questions on who tends to excel at either test there? Questions on that? Make sure I'm not blabbing on too long here. Okay, we'll keep on going. How to prepare better for each test here. So, with the current ACT, the ACT isn't really changing much. The only shift that we're going to see in the next year of the ACT is that they're going to have a slightly different essay. But other than that, the ACT is remaining as it's been for quite some time. So with the ACT, preparing better, students should make sure that they've memorized math formulas. That's particularly true for students who are in advanced math and maybe they haven't done geometry for a while. They need to go back and do some of the review of circles and triangles and area, perimeter, things like that. Working on time. Timing, that's a big component of the ACT, making sure students are comfortable with the pacing. They know how many questions they might want to guess on, how much they're going to do, so they can figure that out ahead of time. With the SAT, in the current configuration of the SAT, working on vocab building is very important, and also just working on abstract thinking. With the current math, it's a lot more abstract. So the way with both to get better, what students do in school, taking rigorous courses, will have a big impact on helping them do better here. I think if someone is sort of wondering, okay, should I have my child take the easy class and get an A, or the more challenging AP or honors course, maybe get a B, I think one thing you might want to factor into that decision is that if someone is taking more rigorous courses, AP, IB, honors, it's probably going to stretch their minds and make them able to read better, to be able to be more comfortable with challenging concepts they come across. Like for example, on the ACT Science, when I have students who have taken or are taking AP Chemistry, AP Physics, AP Bio, when they go into the ACT and they see passages that are similar to things that they've done in school, they feel so much more at ease with those. And it's not as though you need to know that, but it's just you have a greater comfort level with that. So I would encourage you to take rigorous courses, read quite a bit, and then some other things we can do. As far as the materials, there are a lot of materials out there for preparation, and you want to be very careful which materials you use. I like to use materials that either are from the source, from SAT or ACT directly, and once those are gone, then also use materials I've written, because just the process that we've gone through to write the materials is very painstaking. So you want to be careful of materials you use, and just the sorts of questions you're asked on these, just becoming familiar with them is very important. And I think with the change to the SAT, I've just been looking at previews of some of the types of questions they have, and they really involve a lot of critical thinking, especially some of the new math questions. They're like multi-paragraph questions for just a simple question, rather than just solve for X. They have you look at data and look at trends, look at patterns, so it will definitely help to become familiar with those things. So questions on preparation with those? Questions on preparation, independent, the classes, anything like that? Okay. So college importance with these. So with the ACT and SAT, they are, I'll start here with the similarities. They are accepted by either test rather, is accepted by colleges across the country. That was not always the case. As late as the 1990s, there were still some colleges that only accepted the SAT, but the ACT and SAT are universally accepted, and So it makes sense to try them both and see which is preferred. There are some schools that don't require either. There is a list of those on a website called fairtest.org. There are about 800 schools that don't require it. However, they are happy to have people do them, and some people believe that they make it test optional just to encourage more people to apply. So I don't know the answer to that, but you can look at that, particularly if your child is really gifted in, say, art or music, or has some other ability that sort of a standardized test is not coming close to capturing the extent of your child's ability. You might want to look at some of those colleges that are test optional. Some other things with similarities there. As far as the SAT writing and an ACT essay, a lot of colleges are up in the air as far as whether they require those. So you just want to check with the college itself and see what they think. This is a really important point with this. The ACT and SAT, generally speaking, are about a quarter to a third of what colleges will consider when it comes to admissions. And in most other countries, the standardized test that is for college admissions plays a much larger role as far as college acceptance. So it's very important that when students are, while it's important to focus on the SAT and ACT, it's extraordinarily important to make sure that students have a really solid extracurricular profile, that they have excellent grades, and that they're going to be able to get good letters of recommendation, and that they have demonstrated interest in the school. That is increasingly important for colleges, because colleges want to have a high yield. When they send out admission letters, they want people to whom they offer admission to accept. That helps them, just fill up their classes. It helps them rank much more highly, like in the U.S. News rankings, if they have a higher yield. So something that colleges do to make sure that they do have a higher yield is to look at your demonstrated interest. So when you interact with the colleges, make sure that they're making note of who you are. If you email them, if you have a campus visit, things like that. They want to see that you're not just applying to 80 schools. I'm on a college admissions forum where one of my colleagues said that she had a student who applied to 88 schools this year, and that's a bit much. They want to make sure that they're not sending admission notices, people like that. Now, another major misconception is that you have to only take the test once and it has to be perfect. I know of no college where they will take like an average of your worst score and your best score. Okay, colleges will, at a minimum, take the best score overall that you have. So I think it makes sense to try it maybe 2 or 3 times. I think 3 is probably a good number. There's a small risk, I think, if you start taking the test like 5 or 6 times, that they might look and think, okay, maybe this student's being a little obsessive. We're not sure if we want them there. Like in one of these forums, someone was talking about how they had someone apply who had 9 letters of recommendation instead of 3. So they thought that the person might be a little bit too intense for their school and declined to admit them despite their strong academics and everything. So, but I think if you take them 2 or 3 times, you really don't have any risk of it looking like you're being obsessive with that. And you have the added benefit, just tying into some of these other things here on the margins, that colleges, when it comes to the SAT, will almost all do what's called super scoring. They'll take the best score from each section. They'll take the best math, the best reading, the best writing. And so if you've taken it 2 or 3 times, then you can compile the best scores from each of those individual sections, and that gives you an overall really, really solid score. So you have an interest then, I think, in trying to take the test a couple or 3 times perhaps. And then you can also, one thing to put your mind at ease too, with figuring out, do you send the scores automatically? One thing that you might think about, because they do allow you to send scores to 4 schools free of charge, is you might want to save that for safety schools. You might want to have the scores you send automatically just go ahead and go to safety schools, because that way when your child's taking the test, they won't feel that pressure, like, okay, Harvard or Stanford's going to see my score, and as they're taking the test, they're feeling worried about that. Now, that's not going to have an impact when it's all said and done, as far as, if the college, gets the score from the test or gets it later. Eventually they'll get the best score the student has. But it's hard for students not to think about that in the back of their minds when they're taking the test and wonder, oh my gosh, they're going to see the score, how's it going to go? So you can, when it's all done, when all the scoring and testing is done, you can then choose to send your scores to particular schools and see how they would do. One other thing to keep in mind with the scoring with these tests as well, the SAT subject tests. They used to be called SAT-2s, so I wrote it that way as well, but they're just called SAT subject tests now. There are a lot of schools that do want you to do those. And as spring approaches, that's something to think about for your child. If your child's in an AP or honors course like chemistry, world history, U.S. history, physics, where there is a subject test that corresponds to that particular class subject, it can make all the sense in the world to take that test, that subject test, in the spring, because the material will be fresh. And most students, you're going to have in the first half of May, that's when the AP tests are given. And then June is an opportunity for students to take the subject test. So students could take the subject test after they've done the AP exam. And also, in most AP classes, after the AP exam, teachers hold back and don't assign as much work. So students might have more time to study, to prepare for those tests. So that's something that you can keep in mind as well. So some other things to do with this, as far as the college importance, just generally in the Midwest, people might be a bit more familiar with the ACT, and on the coast, people might be more familiar with the SAT, but the people doing the admissions in the colleges, they are familiar with both. They will look at either, so you don't need to worry about that. What questions do we have about college importance here? Yes?
You're talking about AP class.
Yes.
Take the subject. How about the kids take the IB classes?
Oh yeah, those can correspond. Well, the nice thing is that the AP is administered, is run by College Board, who also does the SAT and makes the subject test. So there is a bit more alignment between the curriculum you have on the subject tests and the AP tests than we do with the IB. The IB, I used to teach some IB classes, and the emphasis on IB classes is much more like as far as the depth that you might have. I think the IB sciences would probably line up better with the subject tests than with the IB humanities. The IB humanities, the literature would probably line up nicely because that's more of a skill as far as reading poetry and reading some challenging passages. But I think the histories with the IB would not line up as well, because like history of the Americas, for example, has a very big focus just on a particular time period, rather than looking at more like from the beginning of the colonies all the way up to the present day, which is what the AP US history test does and what the subject test does. So I think when it comes to the sciences, though, they line up fairly well with that as well, AP or IB, but just humanities I would be a little bit careful
You
with that.
recommend taking the test in June after they finish the IB science test?
I think so, yeah, and the College Board puts online, if you just Google, SAT subject test practice, they have sample questions. There's also a big book, the official SAT subject test guide, okay, and it has a full practice test of all the different SAT subject tests. Now, just you don't need to go overboard with the subject test. As far as a general rule with this, it's something that schools, sort of like Ivy League schools and similar difficulty schools, something that they would require, and usually it's just a couple of tests. The most I've seen would be like if someone's applying to like an Ivy League level engineering program, they might have to do maybe like a math and a physics and something else subject test. So that's about as extreme as I've seen, is like having to do 3 subject tests, but it's not a huge thing. One slight benefit, by the way, with the subject test is you can at some schools if your child's really good at multiple choice tests, but maybe not as good at the free response, the essays, there are quite a few schools that will allow you to use the SAT subject test scores as credit for college classes, so you can save some money on tuition that way. So, does that answer your question with that?
Yes, thank
Great.
you.
Other questions? Yeah, please.
How different is the SAT subject test than like the AP exam?
I'd say the SAT subject tests are basically, they're just like an hour each, and you can take up to 3 of them on a Saturday morning, pick which ones you want to do. And the subject test is very much like the multiple choice part of the AP exam. I think if you were to look at, for example, AP World History, and then the World History subject test, if you were to look at questions from one to the other, they wouldn't be all that different. You'd probably notice some minor differences there. I think on the AP multiple choice, they might be a little more challenging as far as the critical thinking involved, and the subject test may be a little less heavy critical thinking involved, but they are pretty similar there. But I think if you have that option, like if you're sophomore or junior, you've taken an AP test, and you do that in May, you take the subject test in June, you have 2 or 3 weeks there where you can go get a guide, Prince Review, Barron's, whatever, Capitol. You can look at some of the different reviews and see what would be a good fit. And then during that time, rather than just watching a movie or doing whatever, doing it as a study hall, you can study while it's fresh. And you won't be in the situation I've had some students in the past where it's fall of senior year, they realize they need to do a subject test, and then they have to go back and review all this material when it's not fresh, on top of having to do their essays and their applications and maintain a very rigorous course load and everything.